walk-ins, and what better person to talk about it but Rampa Lobsang. So let me go ahead and put
the cultures Secker and Warburg brought out what they thought was a very good occult book. Neither did they, nor Doubleday and Company, the New York publishers, foresee that this book would suddenly capture the imagination of two nations as the general public read the most fascinating book on Tibet ever published. The book was autobiographic and told the strange and inspiring story of a Tibetan monk who had progressed from neophyte to lamahood and had eventually attained a certain occult faculty, which comprised the title of the book. The Third Eye, by Tuesday Lobsang Rampa, was not only a recounting of his initiations and monastery doings, but it also proved to be a highly lively account of everyday Tibetan life. We read the book from cover to cover one night, every bit as fascinated as everybody else. But we couldn't help wondering how an Easterner could have mastered the English language. Some Tibetan scholars took place in London when some Tibetan scholars challenged the author Tibetan and had never been to Tibet. Then Lobsang Rampa's side of the story was revealed. No, he had indeed never been to Tibet in his present body. The spirit of a Tibetan Lama had, however, entered his body under unusual circumstances. In reply to his critics, Rampa stated, "The Third Eye is absolutely true, and all that I write in this book is fact. I, a Tibetan Lama, now occupy what was originally the body of a Western man, and I occupy it to the permanent and total exclusion of the former occupant. He gave his willing consent, being glad to escape from life on earth in view of my urgent need." The actual changeover occurred on the 13th of June 1949, but the way had to be prepared some time before that. I know that I have a special task to do, and I became aware that it would be necessary to come to England for various reasons connected with it. In the latter part of 1947, I was able to, by telepathy, send impressions to a suitable person. In February 1946, he changed his name by legal deed poll. To make the changeover easier, he altered his address a number of times and lost contact with all friends and relations. On the 13th of June 1949, he had a slight accident which resulted in concussion and which knocked him out of himself. This enabled me to take over. I tried very hard indeed to obtain employment in England, but for various reasons there was no assistance from the employment exchange. For years I visited employment exchanges and the appointment bureau in Tavistock Square, London. I was also registered with a number of private employment agencies and paid quite a considerable amount to them in fees, but none of them did anything for me. For some time we had lived on capital which had been saved and upon anything which I was able to earn from doing freelance writing or advertising. I had a special task to do because during my life in Tibet, I had been to the Changtang Highlands, where I had seen a device which enables people to see the human aura. I am a clairvoyant and can see the aura as I have demonstrated to many people at many times. But I am aware that if doctors and surgeons could see the human aura, then they could determine the illness afflicting a human body before it was all serious. It was not possible for me to come to England in the body which I had then. I tried, but to no avail. The aura is merely a coronal discharge of the body, of the life force. It is similar to the coronal discharge from a high-tension cable, which can be seen by almost anyone on a misty night. And if money would be spent on research, medical science would have one of the most potent tools for the cure of disease. I had to have the money in order to carry out my own research. But I have never taken money for curing people's illnesses or for taking their troubles off their shoulders, as has been misrepresented in a certain paper. And how did The Third Eye come to be written? I certainly did not want to write it, but I was desperate to get a job so that I could get on with my allocated task. I tried for job after job without avail, until eventually a friend offered to put me in touch with a gentleman who might be able to use my service. Mr. Brooks said I should write a book. I insisted that I did not want to write a book, and so we parted. Mr. Brooks wrote to me again and once more suggested that I should write a book. In the interval between seeing him and receiving his letter, I had been for other interviews and had been rejected. So, with much reluctance, I accepted Mr. Brooks' offer to write such a book. And here again, I repeat that everything said in that book is true. Everything said in my second book, Doctor from Lashar, is also true. One should not place too much credence in experts or Tibetan scholars when it is seen how one expert contradicts the other, when they cannot agree on what is right and what is wrong. And, after all, how many of these Tibetan scholars have entered a lamasery at the age of 7 and worked all their way through the life of a Tibetan, and then taken over the body of a Westerner? I have. What about the man whose body Rampa took over? What of his former life before the transformation? Following are some remarkable statements by his wife. Many people will wonder about the one who occupied that Western body before it was taken over by a Tibetan, and I, as the wife, would like to tell you something of the events leading to the change of personality. At the first indication of something different was more than a little startled. We were leading a quiet life in Surrey, my husband being on the staff of a correspondence college in an advisory capacity, and the war had been over for 2 years. Out of the blue came his remark towards the end of 1947. Sitting quietly for some time, he startled me by suddenly saying, "I'm going to change my name." I looked at him aghast, for I had failed to see any point in doing such a thing. We have nothing to hide, nothing from which to run away. It took me some time to recover after he continued, "Yes, we will change our name by deed poll." By February 1948, all the legal formalities had been completed, and we had no further right to our previous name. My husband's employer was not pleased, but there was little he could do about it, especially as, at about that time, one of the firm's directors had made an alteration to his own name. Of course, everyone thought we had at last taken leave of our senses, but that had never bothered me. I had lived with my husband for 8 years, and knew that if he had a hunch to do anything at all, there was always a very good reason for it. Soon, however, we noticed people were not saying our name when addressing us, and even after seeing it written, they didn't seem to be able to spell it. For that reason, we later contracted it. I want to clarify this point, to show that we have at no time used an alias, as has been mistakenly suggested. At about this time, my husband talked a great deal about the East, and on occasions he did in fact wear Eastern dress. He often seemed to be very preoccupied in his manner, and I have known him to fall into a trance state and speak in an unfamiliar tongue, which I now believe to be a language of the East. In July 1949, he again made a sudden decision, this time to give up his job. This he did to the consternation of his employer, who had always found him to be a very useful and conscientious member of his staff. The idea behind this was so that we could leave the district and lose all contact with the past, which we did. Within a year, we had completely lost touch with previous acquaintances and with our former life. We had managed to exist on what we had saved, together with what we could earn from various forms of writing. The day I happened to look out of the window and see my husband lying at the foot of a tree in the garden is something I shall never forget. I hurried out to find he was recovered, but to me, a trained nurse, he seemed to be stunned or something. When eventually he regained consciousness, he seemed to act differently and in ways that I did not understand. After getting him indoors and upstairs to our flat to rest, the main thought in my mind was to get a doctor as quickly as possible, but I was reckoning without him. He seemed to sense my alarm and implored me not to do so, assuring me that he was quite all right. Certainly his speech seemed different, more halting, as if he was unfamiliar with the language, and his voice appeared to be deeper than before. For some time I was quite concerned, for something seemed to have happened to his memory. Before speaking or moving, he appeared to be making calculations. Much later, I learned that he was tuning into my mind to see what was expected of him. I do not mind admitting that in the early stages I was very worried, but now it seems quite natural. I have never ceased to wonder that such an ordinary individual as myself should be so closely associated with such a remarkable occurrence as the advent of a Tibetan Lama to the Western world. Although the so-called Tibetan scholars grabbed most of the press copy, there were those who felt that they were not so scholarly after all. Consider the following letter received by Gray Barker from a Buddhist when Barker announced that he would publish Rampa's second book in the United States and discuss the controversy in print. Dear Mr. Barker, after reading your remarks on Lobsang Rampa's The Third Eye, I am prompted to add a few of my own. During 1957, I had occasion to write a review of the book for the North Indian Buddhist Quarterly, and most especially to discuss the theological and philosophical material contained within the text. At the time I wrote the review, I was, as were so many others, trying to find fault with the accuracy of the information given. I had already heard that some of the descriptions of costume and garb did not accord with the reports of academic anthropology, and, in my ignorance of the divergencies of Tibetan religion from Orthodox Buddhism, I was shocked to find that one who called himself a monk should embrace views which, from the standpoint of Aryan doctrine, were all but heretical. Imagine my surprise then when I received letters from Tibetan Pongi complimenting the succinct description of Dumchan's theology contained in my review. This description was composed exclusively of paraphrases on the Lobsang Rampa book under review. The greatest point of discussion was that which had to do with the order of discipline within the internal communities of Tibetan monks. The Western correspondents and Indian observers all told me that Rampa was wrong, but the Tibetans wrote complaining that he had divulged secret knowledge, which was the property of their arcane schools of their country, and which a close brother in physical form, or eteric, did poorly to publish in the far lands to the west, where it still lay open to the gaze of the uninitiated. Sincerely yours, Gensha Magaguru, at Bondi Sangha, South America, New York, New York. Even though exposed by Tibetan scholars, the public continued to believe in Rampa and to buy his books. Rampa's subsequent books gave more details of experiences which he had encountered after the period covered by the Third Eye. Some of them consist of practical occult teachings from which the ordinary person can profit. Rampa kept the subject of flying saucers and space travel out of his books, evidently afraid that these accounts might not be believed. Some of these writings included in this book have been published by the Saucer Press, and some of them have been circulated privately in a mimeographed manuscript edition. Public awareness of the UFO phenomenon, however, has come a long way since the 1950s. We think it is time to put together Rampa's flying saucer writings in book form so that the public can read of these remarkable experiences. And so, this limited edition has been prepared and published. We predict that it will be much sought after, and that once the original edition is gone, it will become a prized collector's item. The copy you hold will become worn and dog-eared before its demise. We hope it will give pleasure to the owner and to those who borrow it. The publisher. Before its demise. We hope it will give pleasure to the owner and to those who borrow it. The publisher.
So
Dr. Lobsang Rampa.
that was so
Dr. Lobsang Rampa.
that was
Society of Authors.
hang on. Was an excerpt from a Rampa Lobsang book. These are the books that I was reading when I was 13. And this was about a walk-in. Rampa Lobsang was a walk-in. And he was a Tibetan monk who had walked into a British man's body, basically taking it over, okay? And this is not woohoo shit. Even Hollywood in the 1940s, that's the irony, late 30s and 1940s, would make movies, comedies about walk-ins. Walk-ins is when a soul has decided that it wants to leave its incarnation, and another soul is saying, I don't want to be diapered, I don't want to be a baby, I don't want all that bullshit, I just want 10 years to get shit done. And there's a switch that happens. And when you read Rampa T. Lobsang's books, and I remember reading that, because I remember at around 17, I came across the fact that they were calling him a fraud. The thing about the details, you have to understand, he was writing these books in the 40s and early 50s. And there was no way you would know the detail of a Tibetan monk's life or Tibet to that level of detail unless you'd been there. And just basic, interesting things. So he wrote books like The Third Eye, The Saffron Robe. It goes on and on. There's a whole list. I mean, it's just a whole collection of books you can get on eBay. There's what's beautiful about this new age that we live in, this new timeline, I should say, fuck new age, is that many of these old writers that are long dead are being rediscovered. And it warms my heart because you have to understand, when I was reading these books, it was 1970s. And I believe he died in late 1960s. He dropped his, I'm going to say he dropped his body. So hopefully you heard that. Unfortunately, the sound was very low, but I'm going to upload this on YouTube so you can check it out. And I will give you titles of books in the comment section. You know what I mean? You can check it out. But The Third Eye was the first book I believe I read. And it's about the initiation and opening of the third eye. I also remember, and I forgot which book it was in that Rampa wrote about, was when the monks walked into the Himalayas, and suddenly a portal opened, and from the snowy, windy, cold, they walked into a jungle. It felt like more like, not a jungle, sorry, a forest. Something straight out of Hawaii or Tahiti, where suddenly there was like fruits hanging from the trees and the smell of lang lang and things of that nature. And it was warm and beautiful. And it was literally a portal. And I don't know why, honestly, I believed it, but it felt so true to me. And later on, I would read, again, late 70s, that in Mount Shasta there were portals. I had never heard of that before. And writers were talking about Mount Shasta and the power portals and how people would disappear and how people could actually go through the portals and return and things of that nature. And today we know there are portals. There are portals that can be created through frequency, vibration, sound. And but the Bermuda Triangle was another one that was fascinating to me of portals. It was called the Devil's Triangle, actually, or AKA the Bermuda Triangle, where literally flights in midair, on radio, in contact, suddenly, boom, disappearing. In fact, reportedly, there was a passenger plane that was never recovered. And when today's satellites, we could see the bottom of the ocean now, and we could actually look and see if that plane was in the ocean. There's no reports of any such craft. So portals are very interesting, and it's something that we need to do more studies. I'm kind of shocked that in the public view, we're not looking and seeing scientists working with portal publicly. I know that they're probably doing it privately. I wouldn't be surprised. And creating portals. I mean, look at the movie Stargate. So any questions or comments on that? I thought it was interesting. I wanted you guys to read it verbatim. I don't have the book, the hard copy, so I wasn't able to read it to you, but I will. I do have The Third Eye. I do have a lot of his books, and I plan to, get more as I, to complete the library on his particular work. But he was a man who suffered. Actually, he was ridiculed and so forth. But to me, it's no different. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Kundun, 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 and it's about the Dalai Lama and how they found him. And the protocol is they look for a brand. Usually, it's a 3, 4, 5-year-old child, typically 3 or 4, under 5, typically, from what I've seen. And they will put items in front of the child, and they pick the child based on that, on the child picking all of their former items. And Tibet and the practice of Buddhism in Tibet is quite interesting. They were a warring race of people who turned into a race of people of peace and, devout to Buddhist principles and right action and so forth. And there were definitely jails in Tibet. People are making judgment on the Tibetans today, not realizing what the trauma they've gone through in the last, say, 75 years. And it will... I can't go into details, but in every war throughout the centuries, no matter what, there's always been and there's always been mixing of races to oppress the bloodlines of the masculines. Do you understand? I don't know how to say it without being fucking banned right now. Suffice it to say that the masculines are always called, the feminines kept, and seated with the conquering bloodlines. Let's put it that way. Hopefully I said it correctly. It's what happened to India when the Persians came. It's what happens. It's what always happens. That's why, for example, you have Irish men and women who have Roman profiles. For example, my twin being one of them. He looked like a bust out of a Roman general or, some kind of conqueror. It was definitely Roman. Because of that egregious way of oppressing a people. So anyway, the walk-ins concept is not as unusual as you think. And one of the famous movies that actually did a whole screenplay on walk-ins was called Heaven Can Wait with Warren Beatty, and you can go check it out. And but there are definitely 40s movies, black and white movies. You can check it out as well. But hopefully you enjoyed that. Wanted to share that with you. And again, sending you much love on your journey. This will be up on YouTube. Hopefully it'll sound good. All right, namaste, be well.